Hi everyone. So what I thought we'd do is just talk a little bit through your pelvic floor and just how to achieve a really good contraction of your pelvic floor. So to start off with, quite simply, your pelvic floor is a group of muscles. It sits at the base of your pelvis and it just helps to support the pelvic organs. Now, when we're trying to contract these pelvic floor muscles, the most thing that we want to be thinking about is that we want our tummy and our bottom and our legs to be really relaxed. So you can do this in whichever position. If you're just starting off with these pelvic floor contractions, then what I would tend to do is to come where you're sitting or lying in a position, lying flat on your back or lying with those legs a little bit bent, anywhere you feel you can really relax here. And what I would do is pop your hands onto your bottom just to make sure that when you're doing your pelvic floor muscle contractions, that those bottom muscles aren't wanting to get involved. Now, these pelvic floor muscles, they are like a hammock. So they go from your coccyx round through to your pubic bone. And when we're contracting this pelvic floor muscle, the movement is going from the back, drawing up and forwards to the front. So first thing that we're thinking about when we're doing these is our back passage. So this is where we want to be thinking about trying to close that back passage. So imagine you're trying to hold a bit of wind. So this is where I kind of like to call this our wink and zip. So think about, it gets a little bit graphic now, you've got to go with me. Think about winking with your back passage. And then we're going to try and zip from the back of that back passage all the way around to the front. So think of that hammock. So you're doing a zip from the back round to the front to that pubic bone. So as you're doing this, you shouldn't feel that kind of natural just drawing everything just up. If you just do that up motion, then what it's going to be working is more of those superficial muscles. It's not going to get to the deep muscles. So this is why we always go back passage and then try and do that zip from back to front, drawing everything up and forwards. Now, an alternative cue to this could be thinking about that pubic bone at the front. And if you want to just think about trying to draw that pubic bone to the coccyx, so drawing it to your tailbone, but still getting that little kind of trying to stop yourself from breaking wind. So you're just drawing up the back passage at the same time. Now, if you've been assessed by a physio and have been told a different way to cue, obviously they will have been able to potentially do an internal examination, so they will know the cue that works best for you for your pelvic floor. So go with whichever way that you've been taught if you know that from your assessment that's what gives you the best pelvic floor muscle contraction. But otherwise, see how you got on with that wink and that zip. So next from here, now hopefully you've got that feeling of what it's like to do that pelvic floor muscle contraction. We really want to bring in the breathing. So with the breathing, it's really important. The pelvic floor, so we said it sits at the base of that pelvis. And then you've got your intra-abdominal muscles, which loop around. And then you've got your diaphragm, which sits up top. So with this motion here, when we take a breath in, what tends to happen is our diaphragm moves downwards and our pelvic floor has to relax in order to relieve some of that pressure, that intra-abdominal pressure. So if when you're doing your pelvic floor, if you take a breath in and try and do your pelvic floor at the same time, it's working against that pressure. So what we want to try and do is take a breath in, and then as we take a breath out, as that diaphragm moves up, that relieves some of that pressure and makes it a little bit easier for us to engage through that pelvic floor to start off with. So once we've got that contraction, once we've got that feeling like we take a breath in, and then as we breathe out, we wink and zip, we draw that pelvic floor up and forwards, we keep our breath going. And what that is doing, as that diaphragm is now moving up and down and we're keeping that pelvic floor muscle contraction, that is allowing our pelvic floor just to be tested a little bit against our intra-abdominal pressure. So while we're holding these pelvic floor muscles, what we're doing is we're working on our endurance. So we're seeing how long we can hold these pelvic floor muscles for and making sure that we can really get a release afterwards, so we've got that control over them. Now with these, there's no one size fits all. It's not a case of, okay, hold it for 10 seconds and do that 10 times a day, 3 times a day, whatever long. It's really individualized to what you're able to do, and what you might find is that it changes quite a lot for you on a day-to-day basis as well. So you might find in the morning that you might wake up, you had a really lovely night's sleep, and you're able to do your little wink and zip. You can hold it through your breath and you're able to maintain that for sort of 12-15 seconds, not a problem. And then you get a really nice release afterwards that you've controlled. Later on in the day, when you've been running around a little bit more, if you're feeling a little bit stressed, if you've been doing lots of exercise, if you're just getting tired at the end of the day, you might find that actually you might be able to hold it for 4 or 5 seconds, and then when you release, actually you're not feeling that release. It's more of like a gradual decline through that hold. So what I would say is, for you, what you want to be doing is going for as long as you can, up to 12 to 15 seconds, doing that for up to 12 to 15 times in a row, but you're always doing it to the point where you feel release. So just because at the beginning of the day you can do it for 12 seconds doesn't mean that you keep holding it for that as the day goes on. Now, what you're aiming to do is to do this 3 times a day to start off with. And when you're doing this 3 times a day, don't do it when you're having your breakfast, lunch and dinner. I always say try not to do it when you're in bed at the end of the day as well, because at that time of day, you're quite tired. It's the end of the day. We wouldn't expect our body to go and do some bicep curls and go and do some squats while we're lying in our bed. So we shouldn't expect our pelvic floor to be able to do it and to be able to do it effectively at that time of day either. So I would aim to be doing these exercises when you wake up in the morning, and then if you can maybe do it at 11 o'clock-ish when you get a cup of tea, and then maybe sort of mid-afternoon. But again, judge it according to what works well for you. So after we've done the endurance exercises for our pelvic floor, we then move on to the quick pelvic floor movements. Now, our pelvic floor has different muscle types to it. So it's got what we call slow twitch and fast twitch muscle fibers. And this is because our pelvic floor has to respond to different things. So when we're running across the road, if we've got to go and run and catch a bus or run and catch up with somebody, then that's requiring these endurance muscles to be working. That pelvic floor has got to be engaged to support those pelvic organs. Now, if we're shouting or laughing, then what we're going to need is these quick fire contractions of your pelvic floor. So we've got to make sure with our exercises that we're addressing both of these muscle fiber types. Now, when we're doing our quick muscle fiber contractions, what we want to do is our breath in. As we breathe out, do our wink and zip, draw that pelvic floor up and forward, and then release, and then rest. So we take a breath, and then as we breathe out, draw that pelvic floor in, release, and rest. And we're doing it with that real control. We're not kind of firing up and down. We want to know that, okay, we've engaged that pelvic floor, and then we've let it go again. Now again, you do as many as you feel comfortable to do, as many as you feel that you can kind of keep that control with. Ultimately, our pelvic floor is a muscle, so like any other muscle, it is going to fatigue. Now, what we want to be aiming with these exercises is that we're doing these 3 times a day, every day, for 3 months. And what the evidence has shown is that if we do this 3 times a day for 3 months, then it will see improvements in our pelvic floor muscle. Now, it's really important, if you have any concerns about your pelvic floor, if you're experiencing any symptoms and you're trying to do these pelvic floor exercises and you're not noticing a difference in your symptoms, then I'd really advise you to get checked by a pelvic health specialist, and just to see what's going on, because just to confuse things, sometimes it's not the fact that our pelvic floor is weak, sometimes it's the fact that our pelvic floor is overactive and tight and not able to contract fully through that range, but not able to release either, which can cause slightly different problems. So always get yourself checked or have a little chat with your healthcare professional. I hope you found that helpful. If you have any questions at any time, please don't hesitate to give me a shout.